The community center was always lively on weekends, filled with soft chatter, the sound of chairs dragging, and people greeting each other as they settled in. On this particular afternoon, the hall looked warm and welcoming. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, landing on the long tables decorated with simple flowers. It wasn't a big event, just a small neighborhood gathering. But people enjoyed coming here to relax and meet familiar faces. Among the volunteers moving quietly around the room was a woman who preferred to stay in the background. She carried a gentle smile, the kind that came and went without drawing attention. Her job today was simply place cups on the tables, refill water jugs, and make sure everybody had what they needed. She wasn't the kind to speak much, and most people only noticed her because of how politely she did everything. At the far end of the hall stood an old upright piano. Its dark wood was scratched in a few places, and one of the keys had a small chip. It hadn't been used much except for the occasional child pressing random notes. Still, it had a charm of its own, like an old friend quietly waiting to be remembered. A group of guests sitting near the piano were laughing and talking loudly. One of them pointed toward the woman as she walked by with a tray of cups. "Hey, do you know how to play anything on this old piano?" Another one chimed in. "Just a simple tune. Something small. Come on, play something." She stopped, surprised. Her eyes shifted to the piano and then back to the group. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she didn't want to be. She shook her head a little. "Oh no. It's been years," she said quietly. "I don't really play." But they kept insisting, all in a friendly way, not knowing they were making her uncomfortable. "Just a little melody," one of them said. "Nothing big. You must know at least something. Everyone knows something." She stood there holding the tray close to her chest, unsure of what to do. She didn't want to appear rude. She also didn't want to draw more attention by refusing too strongly. So she gave a small, polite smile and said, "I only remember a few easy things. Nothing special." Before she could walk away, another voice joined in. This time it came from a person sitting closer to the piano, someone with a kind expression. "It's fine if it's simple. Just a few notes. It might be nice to hear the piano again." They weren't teasing her. They were genuinely gentle. That made her pause. She looked at the piano again. There was a mix of fear and something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She took a slow breath. "All right?" "Just for a moment," she said softly. The group cheered playfully, but she didn't react to that. She walked toward the piano with careful steps, as if approaching something fragile. It felt strange to be watched. Her fingers were slightly cold, and she rubbed them together before sitting down. The wooden bench creaked under her, familiar in a way that brought a small ache to her chest. She placed the tray on a nearby chair and stared at the piano keys. Her hands hovered over them for a moment, unsure. Her reflection hid faintly in the gloss of the instrument. In that silent second, the room around her continued to buzz with noise, laughter, shifting chairs, conversations, but to her it all sounded far away. She pressed a single key gently. The sound was soft, almost shy, but it echoed in the hall. She breathed slowly, remembering the weight of the keys, the slight resistance, the warmth of music that once filled her days. A long time ago, before her life became busy with responsibilities and work, she spent hours learning melodies in a quiet room. She didn't have formal lessons. Everything she knew came from watching others, from listening carefully, from feeling her way through songs until she understood them. Music had once felt like its own language, a place where she could breathe without fear. But life had a way of pushing dreams aside. One year after another passed, and soon she had no time, no instrument, no room to play. The only place she could keep music alive was in her heart. And even there, her grew quiet now, Sitting in front of this old piano, she felt like a small part of her younger self was waking up. She touched another key, then another, letting the memories return slowly. She didn't want to make mistakes in front of people. She didn't want them staring at her. So she chose the simplest melody she remembered, one that children often practiced. The first few notes were uncertain. Her hands trembled slightly, and she played softly, almost too quietly. A few guests leaned closer to hear better. The melody was harmless and easy, a tune many people recognized. It wasn't impressive or special, but it was enough to make the room pause for a moment. She focused on each key, trying to block out the eyes watching her. She didn't like being judged. She didn't like being the center of attention. But as the melody continued, something subtle shifted inside her. The hesitation in her fingers began to fade. The sound of the piano grew steadier. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing slowed. The piano felt warm again, familiar, like an old friend she hadn't seen in years. She played the last few notes of the simple tune with a smoother touch. Someone in the group clapped lightly, but she didn't respond. Not yet. She stayed seated, her fingers resting on the keys. The applause didn't matter. What mattered was the strange feeling spreading through her, something she hadn't felt since she was much younger. She stayed still, almost frozen. The room around her was no longer loud. People had settled into a quiet curiosity, wondering if she would play something else. But nobody knew what was happening inside her mind at that moment. She wasn't thinking about them anymore. She wasn't thinking about embarrassment or attention or the simple tune they asked for. She was thinking about the music she used to play, the pieces she loved but never dared to show anyone. The notes she memorized, not because someone told her to, but because they made her heart feel full. She remembered sitting by a window years ago, playing for no one but herself. She remembered humming melodies she created out of thin air. She remembered wanting to share them someday, but never did. And as she sat there in the community center, with the chipped piano key under her finger, she felt a familiar spark. A quiet, glowing feeling that told her she still had something inside her, something she thought she lost. Her fingers twitched lightly, as if they wanted to move on their own. She lifted her hand slightly, hesitating only because she wasn't sure if she should continue. She knew they asked her to play something simple, something easy. But the melody in her heart was bigger, deeper, more meaningful. For a second, she wondered if she should stop and walk away. That would be the safer choice. That would keep her hidden, just like always. But the piano felt alive beneath her fingers, and the quiet anticipation in the room somehow encouraged her, even though no one said anything. She took a slow, steady breath. Her hands lowered gently back onto the keys. The room waited, unaware of what was about to happen. She wasn't planning to impress anyone. She wasn't planning to surprise the room. She just wanted to play something that felt true to her, even if only for a moment. With that thought, she pressed the first note of a melody she hadn't played in years, a melody she once wrote for herself. The sound was richer, deeper than the tune before. It carried emotion in every vibration. A few people exchanged glances, surprised by the sudden change in her touch, but she wasn't looking at anyone. Her eyes were closed, her breathing calm, her heart steady. Right there, in that quiet moment, she began to awaken something she had buried long ago, something the room was about to discover in a way they never expected. She sat at the piano with her fingers resting gently on the keys, still feeling the soft echo of the first note she had played. But now the sound was different, deeper, like it came from a part of her she had forgotten. The room had grown quieter, almost without anyone meaning to. People who were chatting earlier now turned their bodies toward her. Some leaned over the table. Others nudged the person next to them to pay attention. She didn't see any of that. Her eyes were half closed as the melody inside her began to take shape. It wasn't something she practiced recently. It wasn't even something she planned to play. It came from a memory faint but warm, like an old light she once followed. Her fingers moved slowly at first, almost as if they were trying to remember the path across the keys. The notes joined together like soft steps on a quiet road. Her hands trembled a little, but the sound was steady, filled with a quiet emotion only she could understand. She played a low note, then a high one, letting the contrast blend into something smooth and gentle. The people listening didn't understand what was happening yet. They only sensed a shift in the room. They expected her to finish the simple tune and walk away. But instead, she played something none of them saw coming. Her thoughts drifted back to when she was younger. She remembered sneaking into a neighbor's home after school. The neighbor had a piano, old, polished, and always wonderfully tuned. The neighbor, an elderly woman, never scolded her for touching it. She only smiled and said, "If your heart wants to play, let it play." Those words stayed with her for years. Back then, she would sit by the window with the piano in front of her, sunlight falling softly on the keys. She didn't have sheet music. She didn't have lessons. She played by feeling. She played by listening. She played by dreaming. But life changed. The neighbor moved away. The piano was taken by distant relatives. And the young girl who loved music had to grow up fast. Work replaced play. Responsibility replaced dream. The little world of song she once lived in became distant. Now, sitting here, her fingers rediscovered that world. Each key she pressed felt like a step back into a memory she never wanted to lose. As she played, her posture changed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her back straightened. Her hands moved smoothly across the piano, touching each key with confidence she didn't know she still had. The melody grew richer, weaving itself across the room. The people watching were no longer whispering. They sat in quiet surprise, wondering how someone so quiet, so gentle, could play with such emotion. One person near the front leaned forward, their eyes widening as the melody grew more complex. Another person whispered, "Where did she learn to do that?" But no one had an answer. She wasn't trying to show off. She wasn't trying to be impressive. She was simply remembering how music once made her feel alive. Her mind drifted again, this time to the small home she grew up in. She remembered sitting in a room that always smelled of laundry and warm food. She remembered humming tunes while doing chores, tapping rhythms on the table when no one noticed. She remembered nights where she stared at the ceiling, imagining herself on a big stage, playing for people who listened because they cared. It felt strange to think of all that now. She was living a life that looked nothing like those dreams. She worked to support herself. She kept her head down. She didn't complain. She didn't expect much. She didn't share her talent because the world around her was too busy to notice. But right now, in this unexpected quiet moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Her fingers moved faster now, flowing from one note to the next without hesitation. She played a soft trill and a delicate run of high notes that sparkled in the air. The music grew gentle again, then swelled with emotion, like a wave rising slowly before falling with grace. People stared, completely absorbed. The volunteers who were stacking chairs stopped mid-movement. A child who had been playing with a toy car froze, eyes wide, listening as if he had forgotten how to blink. Someone near the back lifted their phone quietly, not to interrupt, but to capture the moment, but she didn't notice any of them. Her eyes remained closed. The world outside faded. All she heard was the music. Her hands remembered the way the melody used to climb and soften and climb again. It was a piece she created in her mind when she was younger, but she never played it in front of anyone. To her, it was too personal, too much a part of who she was. Sharing it without meaning to, she felt both exposed and free. She remembered evenings long ago, sitting beside a window with wind drifting through the curtains. She would hum this very melody while waiting for night to settle. Back then, she thought she had time. She thought she could always return to her dream. But dreams sometimes grow dusty when people are too busy surviving. The melody dipped into a soft, emotional section that made the listeners hold their breaths. Her fingers caressed the keys gently, each note like a quiet confession. The sound was warm, honest, full of depth she never shared with anyone. The room felt smaller now, more intimate, as if everyone was connected through the sound flowing from the piano. Even the people who didn't know music could feel something stirring in their hearts. She played a slow passage filled with longing. She didn't mean to express sadness, but it slipped out anyway, through the tremble of her hands, through the tenderness of the notes. The audience could sense it. They didn't know her story, but they felt it in the music. Then her fingers began to rise into a brighter section. The music grew hopeful, like sunlight pushing through a cloudy morning. Her tempo lifted, her movements steadier. She wasn't playing for the room. She was playing for her younger self, the girl who once believed her dreams mattered. The melody swirled beautifully, filling the hall from wall to wall. Some listeners stared in awe. Others felt their eyes sting, not sure why. A few people exchanged looks of disbelief. How could someone who looked so simple, so unnoticed, suddenly reveal a talent that felt so powerful? She played on, building the melody into a small peak before letting it soften again. Every movement of her hands showed how deeply she felt the music, how natural it was, how much it belonged to her. She wasn't perfect. A few notes were slightly softer than she meant them to be. One or two keys were pressed a bit late, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling, the raw, real emotion that made every note come alive. The audience didn't care about perfection. They cared about the truth they heard in her playing. She slowed the melody again, letting each note breathe. Her fingers moved gently, like they were comforting an old memory. A soft sigh escaped her lips, not from stress, but from release. In that moment, she remembered everything she once dreamed of. She remembered the joy, the hope, the longing. She remembered the versions of herself she never had the chance to become. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel regret. She felt gratitude. Gratitude that the music inside her was still alive. The melody began to reach its final part. It grew gentler, softer, like a whisper carried by wind. Her hands slowed naturally, not because she wanted the performance to end, but because the song itself was reaching its closing breath. Around the room, no one moved. No one spoke. They sat completely still. Listening to every last note. She let her fingers play the final soft chord, warm, delicate, lingering in the air like a farewell. Her hands stayed on the keys for a moment, before she finally opened her eyes. The world came back slowly. She heard the faint hum of the lights, the quiet breathing of the people around her, the subtle creak of the wooden bench beneath her. She looked down at her hands, almost surprised at what they had done. It didn't feel real, yet it was the most real thing she had shared in years. She lifted her hands from the keys quietly, her chest rising and falling as if she had just woken from a dream. And in the thick silence that followed, she finally realized everyone in the room had just witnessed a part of her she never expected to reveal. The next morning came quietly, with a soft glow slipping through the windows of the small apartment. The air was still, carrying that early calm before the world fully woke up. She stood by the table, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, trying to gather her thoughts. What had happened the night before at the piano still lived in her mind like a dream. She wasn't ready to let fade. She kept replaying the moment, the hush that covered the room when she began to play, the way people leaned closer, the stunned, look on the owner's face, and the unexpected applause that followed. It felt unreal, almost too big for someone like her, someone who had spent years blending into the background dot as she stepped out to head to work. The streets felt different somehow, brighter, even though she knew nothing outside had changed. The change was inside her. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. Maybe even hope. When she arrived at the restaurant, a few workers gave her looks that were hard to explain. Not rude, not exactly kind either. Just curious. As if they were trying to match her with the girl they had seen the night before sitting at the piano. She didn't say anything. She simply tied her apron and stepped into the familiar rhythm of setting tables, greeting early customers, and checking in with the kitchen. But something else was different too. People were whispering dot. She caught pieces of it whenever she walked past. Is that her? And the one who played last night? Some customers stared at her longer than usual. One older woman gave her a warm smile and said softly, "You have a gift, my dear." The words almost made her stop. No one had said anything like that to her since she was a teenager dot. By lunchtime, the place was full. More full than a weekday should normally be. She sensed it before anyone said. They weren't here just for food. They were here because of what they heard last night. Word had gotten out. The owner called her to the back just before the lunch rush peaked. She felt her stomach twist, unsure if she was in trouble. She stepped in quietly, lowering her eyes the way she always did around him. He wasn't angry. Actually, she couldn't even read his expression. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "People keep asking about you." His tone was flat, confused, maybe even a little unsure. "About your playing." "I didn't expect that." She nodded slowly, not sure how to respond. He continued, "Some of our customers said last night was the best moment they've seen here. A few called this morning to ask if you would play again tonight." Her heart skipped. She didn't know what to say. She had never imagined anything like this would happen. She had only wanted a quiet job and a quiet life. Music had always been something she loved, but kept tucked away because life had taught her that dreams didn't pay the bills. So, the owner said, clearing his throat, "Would you be willing to play again? Not as a performance. Just a few songs here and there. Nothing big. It could bring in more people." The way he phrased it told her everything. This wasn't a favor to her. This was business. Still, she didn't need it to be anything else. She just wanted to play again. She nodded. "Yes, I can do that." The owner gave a quick nod back, as if relieved. "Good. We'll see how it goes." She returned to the floor with a strange mix of nerves and excitement swirling inside her. The rest of the day moved quickly, full of customers who kept glancing her way, waiting to see what would happen. Evening came sooner than she realized. The crowd grew again, buzzing with quiet anticipation. Some regulars brought friends. Some new faces looked around curiously. The piano sat in the corner, waiting. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached it. She sat down slowly, letting her fingers rest on the keys. She took a long breath, feeling the room settle. Then she began to play. Her first few notes were gentle, soft like a whisper easing into the room. But soon the melody grew fuller. Her fingers moved with the memory of old lessons, old dreams, old emotions she never allowed herself to express out loud. People turned toward her. Conversations faded. Glasses were set down quietly. It wasn't just music. It was a story she had carried inside her for years. One she had never spoken, but had always felt dot. As she played, she noticed someone recording with their phone. Then another. Then another. She didn't stop. She didn't freeze. Instead, she played even more freely, letting go of the weight she carried dot. By the time she finished the last gentle note, the room erupted again, not loud or wild, but warm, full of genuine admiration. The applause washed over her like a wave, soft and steady. She stood up slowly, bowing her head, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that one of those recordings would be posted online before she even finished her shift. And it would begin spreading faster than she could understand. Long after the restaurant closed, long after she walked home with tired feet, but a glowing spirit, long after she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with a quiet smile, her world was already changing online. She didn't know it yet, but morning would bring surprises she never expected. The last note of her melody still floated softly in the air, even though her fingers had already lifted from the keys. The room stayed silent in a way that didn't feel empty or awkward. It felt full of something warm, something people couldn't describe even if they tried. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone feels something at the same time. She sat there quietly, her hands resting on her lap now. Her breathing was slow, steady, almost peaceful. For a moment, she didn't dare look up. She didn't know what their reactions were. She didn't know if they liked what she played, or if they thought it was strange. She only knew that she had let out a part of her heart without meaning to. Then, slowly, she heard a soft exhale from somewhere in the room. It was the sound someone makes when they finally remember to breathe. After that came a gentle murmur, and another. It was like the room was waking up again, but still no one spoke loudly. No one clapped right away. They were all trying to understand what they had just heard. She finally lifted her head. The sight surprised her. People were staring at her, not in a harsh or judging way, but with a kind of wonder she had never expected. Their eyes were full of questions, curiosity, and something else she didn't know how to describe. A softness, maybe. A quiet respect. A child sitting on the floor had his hands resting on his toy car, completely forgotten. He stared at her like she had done something magical. An older man near the back had his mouth slightly open, as if he tried to speak earlier, but couldn't find the right words. A woman near the piano had both hands on her chest, as though she had been holding her breath for the entire performance. It took a few moments before anything happened. Then someone whispered, "Wow." The word was so soft that it almost didn't feel real, but it was enough to break the stillness. The whisper spread through the room like a small wave. People started nodding, leaning toward one another, whispering again. Some rubbed their eyes, pretending they weren't moved. Others simply stared, unable to look away from the person who had surprised them so much without even trying. One person stepped closer to her and spoke carefully, as if not wanting to scare her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" they asked. She shook her head gently. "I didn't learn. I just used to play when I was younger." Her voice was small, unsure. Another person added softly, "That wasn't just playing. That was something else." She didn't know what to say. She lowered her gaze again, feeling shy. Attention wasn't something she liked. She preferred being unnoticed, moving quietly in the background, doing her tasks without anyone praising her. But now everyone saw her. And not because she made a mistake or caused a problem. They saw her because she had shared something beautiful. Her heart beat a little faster. The old piano key with a chip sat in front of her, reminding her this moment was real. She traced the chipped edge lightly with her finger. She knew she couldn't hide now, even if she wanted to. One of the volunteers, someone who always had a gentle tone, approached her. "That was truly beautiful," they said. "Do you still play often?" She shook her head again. "No, I haven't played for so long." The volunteer tilted their head. "But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like you never stopped." Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not one so direct. She looked away, hoping the attention would slowly fade. But at DIDN single quotes D. Someone else spoke up carefully. "Could you maybe play something else?" She blinked, surprised. Something else? They nodded eagerly. Only if you want to, of course. We don't want to force you. That small addition mattered. It made her feel safe again. She didn't like being pressured, but being gently invited, that felt different. She looked down at her hands. They still tingled slightly from the melody she had played. A part of her wanted to stop. She had already shared something personal. Playing again felt like peeling back more layers. She wasn't sure she was ready to reveal, but another part of her, one she thought had disappeared, longed to keep going. She placed her hands back on the keys, not making a sound yet. The motion alone made the room quiet again. People leaned in instantly, their faces soft with anticipation. I can try," she whispered. A small smile spread across a few faces. The child on the floor sat up straighter, his toy forgotten completely now. She took a gentle breath and let her fingers rest on the keys. But before she played, her mind drifted again, carried by tea. The morning light crept into the small room slowly, touching the walls with a soft warmth that made everything feel calm for a moment. She sat on the edge of her bed, still trying to understand everything that had happened the day before. It felt like life had shifted overnight, as if someone had picked up her quiet little world and turned it in a new direction. She could feel the change even before she checked her phone and then the notifications began buzzing again. Her heart skipped as she reached for the phone, not knowing what to expect. More messages, more comments, more people sharing the video of her playing at the restaurant. It didn't feel real. She stared at the screen, blinking at the number of views. It had doubled since last night. People from different places were writing things like, "Her music made my day," or "I felt this in my heart." She lowered the phone and took a deep breath. She had never asked for attention. She had never even imagined something like this. But the world had found her anyway. When she finally stepped outside to head to work, the wind felt gentle on her face, but her stomach fluttered with nerves. Everything seemed normal on the surface, the same street, the same buildings, the same quiet morning. But inside her, nothing felt normal anymore, not by the time she reached the restaurant. She knew the day wouldn't be like any other. A group of people stood outside even before opening time. Some held their phones as if they were waiting for something. As soon as she walked closer, a few heads turned. Someone whispered, "That's her." She froze for a moment, unsure if she should smile, hide, or keep walking. She pushed the door gently and slipped inside. One coworker looked at her with wide eyes. "You're famous now," he muttered quietly with a half-smile. She shook her head, not agreeing, not disagreeing. She didn't know what she was yet. The owner walked in a moment later. He didn't scold her or act annoyed like she had feared. Instead, he stood there, holding his phone as if it were something heavy. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen to her. It was the same video. The view count kept climbing every second. People are calling nonstop. They want to know if he'll play again today. She hesitated. "I don't know if." He raised a hand gently, not to stop her, but to settle her. "I'm not forcing anything. But this could be good for you. And for us. Only if you're comfortable." Comfortable wasn't the word she would use. But something inside her, something quiet but strong, told her she shouldn't run from this. For years, she had pushed her music aside, convincing herself it didn't matter and the world didn't care. And yet, people were caring now. Strangers were listening. She nodded softly. "I can play." The owner gave a relieved sigh and left her to prepare. When the restaurant opened, it filled quickly. People weren't just coming for food. They were coming for her. Families, couples, friends, they all watched her with quiet excitement. The attention made her nervous, but there was also something warm about it. These people weren't judging her. They were waiting with hope. Near lunchtime, the owner gave her a small nod. It was time. She walked to the piano, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes following her. Her heartbeat pulsed in her fingertips. She sat down slowly, letting her hands rest on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes and listened to her breath. And she began to play. The first notes floated softly through the room, like a small whisper carrying a memory. People leaned closer. Conversations faded. Phones lifted. But she didn't focus on any of that. She let the music guide her. It felt natural, like something she had carried inside her for years, waiting to be released. The melody grew fuller, deeper, telling a story she herself couldn't put into words. Each note felt honest, like she was speaking through her hands. She could feel the room breathing with her, listening with their hearts. When the last note faded into silence, the moment stretched. And then applause rose, filling the room with warmth. Some people stood. Some smiled at her like they had known her forever. She bowed her head shyly, grateful and overwhelmed. She had never been praised like this. She had never been seen like this. After she stepped away from the piano, customers approached her one by one. A woman with gentle eyes said, "Your music made me cry." "Thank you." A young boy told her he wanted to learn piano after hearing her. A couple said they came all the way from another part of the city just to listen. She didn't know how to respond to all this kindness. She simply nodded, smiling softly. During her break, she finally checked her phone again. The video from today had already taken off. Comments poured in faster than she could read. Messages from people she didn't know filled her inbox. Some asked if she had more music. Some begged her to start a channel or share more of her playing. Then she saw a new message. It was from someone who seemed to work with the community arts center. They invited her to perform at a small event happening soon. Another message came from someone connected to a local music school who said they would love to meet her. Another from someone organizing a neighborhood festival. She stared at the screen. Stunned. Opportunities she had never dreamed of were suddenly appearing. One after another. Her shift ended late that evening, and she walked home with tired legs, but a heart filled with something bright and new. The city felt softer, kinder somehow. The sound of distant traffic mixed with the quiet humming. In her mind, melodies she didn't want to forget. When she reached her apartment, she sat on the floor again, hugging her knees, thinking about everything. She had lived a life where she kept her dreams hidden, where she believed no one would care, where music was a private world. She entered only for comfort. But now the world was knocking on her door. Maybe this was her moment. Maybe she wasn't meant to stay small. And then, just as she prepared to set her phone down, another notification flashed across the screen. It was a message she hadn't opened yet, one that looked different from the rest. She clicked it, and as soon as she read the first line, her breath caught. It wasn't just another invite. It was from someone whose message was about to change everything about what came next. The night felt strangely quiet as she sat near her window, the phone still warm in her hand. She had read the message 3 times, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't like the other messages she had received earlier. This one felt different from the very first line. It came from a well-known local music foundation in the city, an organization she had only heard about in passing. The kind that helped young musicians, offered scholarships, and hosted events that people talked about with admiration. She had never imagined that someone from there would reach out to her. The message was simple but full of meaning. They had seen her video. They were moved by her playing. They wanted to meet her. She didn't know how long she sat there with the message open. The city outside buzzed with life cars passing, people walking, lights flickering from windows across the street. But inside her apartment, everything felt still. She took a deep breath. Everything was happening so fast. too fast. But even in the swirl of nervousness, she felt something bright inside her. Something that almost scared her because of how hopeful it felt. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet settle. There was no one she could call for advice. No one she could ask if this was a mistake or a blessing. She had always walked her path alone, guiding herself slowly through each step of life. And maybe that was why this moment felt both terrifying and beautiful. The next morning, she woke early, unable to fall back asleep once her eyes opened. Her stomach twisted with nerves, and she paced the small room, wondering what she should wear, how she should speak, what she should expect. For someone else, a meeting might seem normal. But for her, a girl who cleaned tables for a living and played music only when she was alone, this felt like stepping into another world. When she left home, the air was cool and crisp. She wrapped her arms around herself as she walked to the bus stop, thoughts swirling like leaves in the wind. Each passing minute felt heavy with possibility. After a long ride and a short walk, she stood in front of the foundation building, tall, bright, modern, with wide windows that reflected the morning sun. She had never been anywhere like this. Her palms felt sweaty as she pushed the glass door open. Inside, everything felt calm and professional. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled warmly. "Are you here for the music appointment?" She nodded, her voice too soft to trust. "Someone will be with you shortly," the woman said. She sat down in a chair near the wall, her hands resting on her lap. Every sound, the soft typing behind the desk, footsteps from a hallway, distant notes from a piano somewhere made her heart beat even faster. After a few minutes, a man with kind eyes approached her. He introduced himself gently and led her down a hallway filled with pictures of young musicians, instruments, and small handwritten quotes about passion and perseverance. "We saw your video," he said as they walked. "It made its way around the city very quickly." She lowered her eyes, shy. "I didn't expect any of this." He smiled. "That's often how real talent comes forward quietly, without trying to be seen." They stepped into a small room with a piano in the center. Sunlight streamed in from a window, lighting up the glossy surface of the keys. "Would you be comfortable playing something?" he asked gently. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Playing was the part she understood, the part she didn't fear. She sat down, feeling the familiar weight of the keys beneath her fingertips. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes briefly, and began to play. The music flowed softly at first, then fuller, richer. The room seemed to shift around her, as if it were listening too. Each note carried a piece of her past, every quiet moment she had spent alone with the piano, every dream she had buried, every emotion she had never spoken out loud. When she finished, she opened her eyes slowly. The man stood still, his hands lightly clasped, his expression soft and full of admiration. "That," he said quietly, "was beautiful." She felt her cheeks warm. He continued, "I want to be honest with you. You have something rare, something people search for, not just skill, heart. And if you're willing, we would like to help you grow it." She blinked, unsure she heard him right. "We can offer you lessons," he said gently. "Training, a chance to perform in our annual event. Opportunities that could open even more doors for you. But only if you want them." Her breath caught. Opportunities, lessons, a chance to perform. For years, she had believed she had lost her chance at music. Life had pushed her away from it, making her choose work over dreams. But here, in this bright room with sunlight pouring in, someone was offering her a path she thought she would never walk again. I don't know if I'm good enough," she whispered. He shook his head softly. "You are. And you can become even better. You just need someone to guide you." She looked down at her hands, the same hands that cleaned tables every day, the same hands that had carried her through pain, through loneliness, through doubt. And yet, those same hands had made music people felt deep inside their hearts. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe she could do more. She looked up and nodded slowly. "I want to try." The man smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "Good, then let's begin." And from that moment, everything in her life began to shift. Days passed in a blur of work and new beginnings. She continued her job at the restaurant, still playing for customers in the evenings. The crowds grew even larger. People came not just to eat, but to listen. Some traveled from other neighborhoods just to hear her play live. But now, after each shift, she went to the foundation for lessons. The instructors there were patient and kind, helping her rediscover everything she had forgotten and discover even more she never learned before. Her fingers grew stronger. Her confidence grew steadier. Her heart grew fuller. Sometimes she would leave the foundation late at night, walking home with tired legs, but a smile she couldn't hide. Music was becoming part of her life again, not a small hidden dream, but something real. As the weeks went on, the foundation invited her to perform at their upcoming event, a gathering where musicians of different ages performed for a large audience. The thought scared her, but also excited her. She practiced every day, pouring her whole heart into each note. The instructors helped her choose a piece, something gentle, emotional, honest, something that reflected who she was. When the day of the event finally arrived, she stood backstage in a simple dress, her hands trembling slightly. She could hear the audience talking on the other side of the curtain. Hundreds of people. She closed her eyes and took a long breath. This was it. When her name was called, she stepped out slowly. The lights felt bright, the room wide and full. She sat at the piano, placing her fingers on the keys. For a moment, she stopped hearing the crowd. She stopped hearing anything at all. Then she played. Her music rose gently at first, then grew with warmth and strength. She wasn't playing for fame or attention. She wasn't playing for the crowd in front of her. She was playing for the girl she had once been, the girl who thought dreams were too far away. Every note felt like a promise to herself. When she finished, the silence lasted just long enough to make her heart tighten, and the applause began, not loud and wild, but deep, warm, full of feeling. People stood. Some wiped tears. The lights seemed brighter. The room felt softer. She bowed her head, overwhelmed by the moment, and in that instant, she knew she had found her place. Her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning, but she finally believed that she belonged in the world of music, that her voice, her heart, her hands had something to offer. And all of it had started with a simple moment in a restaurant, with a girl who never expected anything, but ended up giving the world a masterpiece. He walked beside her as they left the small hall, and the air outside felt cool and calm, almost too quiet after the storm of applause inside. She held her hands close to her chest, as if the music was still sitting warm in her palms. He noticed how softly she breathed now, like someone who had finally released the weight she had been carrying for a long time. They reached a bench outside the building and sat down. The street lights above them flickered gently, making the night look warmer than it really was. She lowered her eyes, unsure what he might say. But he did not speak right away. Instead, he watched her for a moment, as if he wanted to choose the right words and not break whatever peaceful feeling was still around them. Finally, he said quietly, "I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. Not just the way you played, but the way you changed the room. It was like you woke everyone up." She looked away, almost embarrassed. "I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to feel the music again. It has been so long." He nodded. He could see the truth in her eyes. Her performance wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving anything. It was simply her heart speaking through the notes. When she finally turned back to him, her voice was soft. "Do you think it really mattered to anyone? Or was it just something they'll forget tomorrow?" She asked this gently, not with sadness, but with a very quiet uncertainty. He shook his head slowly. "They won't forget. I know they won't. I won't forget either. Someone who can play with that kind of feeling doesn't come around often. People will remember how you made them feel. That's the part no one loses." She listened, and her breath steadied. It was strange how someone she barely knew could understand her so clearly. Maybe it was because he had watched her from the mow.